Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Beast Coast Pokemon. My name is Aaron Cybertron Zhang, and today I am joined by James and Rosemary, and we're here to talk about the brand new format in competitive Pokemon, Regulation G. Now, this format's pretty crazy because it allows for exactly one restricted Pokemon. So unlike previous years where you were allowed two restricted Pokemon, well, now you only get one. And it's been really crazy to see so far. So I'm just curious, before we even dive into specific things, like how do you guys feel about this rule set? And have you been playing it? What do you think about it so far?
Boring.
Oh, wow.
Really?
Okay. Hot take already.
That's how, I mean, for me, this is kind of like one restricted is always kind of weird. I think the only one restricted I really enjoyed playing was like, what was it, Series 10 in Sword and Shield, where it was no Dynamax. Felt like that was pretty okay. I think in this format, though, like restricted wise, there's probably a lot more to explore. So maybe the beginning's been kind of boring, but I think like if you have played ladder, like have done a ladder session, I have played like against 10 Cali Ice teams in a row, literally the same exact comp, and I've gotten so bored at like how like some matchups just play out generally. I feel like a lot of the balanced teams has just been like protect the restricted Pokemon, whether it's Shadow Rider, Ice Rider, Terrapagos, Kyogre sometimes. I think the Koraidon teams are kind of cool, but I don't know, like it doesn't feel super different to Reg F other than like a huge power creep with like, of course, having one restricted. Of course, I don't know. The gameplay to me hasn't been super like involved or into it, I would say.
That's a hot take. Honestly, when I first heard about the format, I thought it was going to be pretty boring. I was like, oh no, like it's going to be so imbalanced. There's so many really powerful single restricted Pokemon that you could put on a team. But after playing the format, I think it's really fun. I think there's a really high level of skill expression for play for individual players. And then I think there's still a lot to explore outside of the Ice Rider Calyrex stuff and the Shadow Rider Calyrex stuff. So I'm really interested to see where people are actually going to start to push the envelope on like the good restricted format.
I think, yeah, my take is that it's just fun because I like having one restricted instead of two. Like I didn't really enjoy any of like the dual restricted formats, and like we haven't had like a world championship with a single restricted before, and so I think that in itself makes playing for Worlds, and I mean the lead up to Worlds with regionals coming up and then NAIC as well, really interesting. My answer might change like a month from now once like things become more standardized and meta. And it's funny, James, because I feel like I've had the opposite experience as you, but that's because I'm not playing on Showdown. I'm playing like in-game ladder and Master Ball tier, and like I just started, and I have played maybe like 20 games and played like 12 different restricted Pokemon across those 20 games. And so I don't know, it's like early format right now. Like I'm not like, you know, particularly high ladder in game either. It's just like random Master Ball games. But I thought it was really cool that I was running into all of these different things. Like I lost against a Lugia earlier today. There's like a Origin Form Dialga. I was like, I don't even know what this Pokemon does, so I had to look it up. As I imagine things will become fairly centralized, like especially after the first wave of regionals. But I don't know. This format excites me a lot more than I think a lot of other like restricted formats. So I've been enjoying it so far. But yeah, we'll see if my answer changes, like, you know, even a few weeks or days from now.
I think it's probably pretty cool in game. Like in game, I think could be really interesting. Like I've only played a little bit of in game so far, so maybe like when I start actually like playing more in game, like I'll have maybe that experience. But yeah, a lot of the teams I feel like are pretty similar right now. What I've been encountering at least.
Well, let's talk about those teams. What have you been running into, James? What are you tired of already this early on?
Dude, it's just like everyone is running Calyrex Shadow Rider, Calyrex Ice Rider. Literally, those are the only two teams that I have faced. And like, I think when I played Best of 3 ladder, I played like out of 50 sets, I played like 48 were either Ice Rider or Shadow Rider. When I played Best of 1 ladder, it was like mostly Ice Rider, and then I'd face a lot of Shadow Rider. I don't know why everyone's so obsessed with Ice Rider. I think it's a good mon, but like everyone's been running the team that won the recent VR tournament. I think
The Jamodri team.
Yeah, the Pelipper.
It's
Moongus.
Calyrex Ice Rider. It's with Clear Amulet, Urshifu, Rapid Strike, Golden Goat, Pelipper, Moongus, and Incineroar.
Yeah, sometimes it's not the exact same like as a pace, but pretty much similar six. I've seen some Shadow Riders also have that like exact same core. It's just Shadow Rider over Ice Rider. It's just kind of, when you play it a bunch of times, it's been pretty much what I've encountered through most of it. Like I played maybe most of the games I think I played have been either Ice Rider or Shadow Rider. I have enjoyed some of the other like matchups when I do actually fight something different. Like then it's kind of fun, but overall, like I've also watched a bunch of tournament games like on Twitch recently, and it's kind of been also the same. I've actually been surprised on how many games also have gone to timer, I think, as well, which I've been shocked by.
Like the format's pretty fast, so that surprises me too, because it feels like games are over faster than.
I think it's just like the Among Us Incineroar mirror where they keep trying to position their restricted, and they just keep like looping with Among Us Incineroar and one other Pokemon, and then the restricted doesn't even get to be brought out until like maybe the last part of the game.
You don't like cycling Intimidates and Fake Outs and Astral Barrages? That's not fun?
I mean, I've done it with Kyogre, but it's just like everyone's doing it now. I didn't like it in 22. I liked it in 19 because like I was the only one using Kyogre Instant and Moon like with Torn at the time, so I felt different. But like now it's everywhere. And I mean everywhere.
Yeah, I do feel like there's a lot of emphasis on the Calorexes right now, and it makes sense because these Pokemon just get insane stats, like have 2 abilities and get a really powerful spread move. So it's interesting. I think there's been a lot of like foundation work built already for the Calyrex teams, like Wolfie won with the Clefairy Calyrex Shadow Rider team in this big online grassroots tournament. And then we had this Calyrex Ice Rider team you guys were just talking about. One of the interesting things to me about this format is the return of Pelipper, by the way, where it's like become very meta relevant again, because of course it gives you weather control. That's valuable in itself. And being able to reduce like fire type super effective damage onto Golden, go onto Calyrex Ice Rider, onto Amoonguss is valuable as well. It's interesting. Like I feel like there's a lot of restricteds that are really viable. It seems like right now a lot of the emphasis is on the Calyrex forms. I think I love Kyogre. Like I feel like people were being like, Kyogre has no potential. There's too many things that wall it, but I just tried like a choice spec set, let Hirofumi Kimura, the world's runner up, use to get to number 1 on the ladder. I was like, this thing hits ridiculously hard. I think Terapagos is a really interesting Pokemon that's still probably kind of underexplored. A lot of people are using like Calm Mind variants with a lot of bulky support like Rillaboom or Comfey and Fake Out support like Incineroar, or you have like Choice Specs variants that are just paired with Shiyu and Tornadus, and you just like spam damage a lot. But yeah, there's so many other restricteds. Like I feel like I lose more frequently to like Rayquaza or Lugia than I do to some of the more common ones, just because I have no idea what to expect from them. And this format, you actually probably could make a decent tier listing of like the restricteds, but like obviously you have a fair number in like the S to A tier, and then a couple more in like the B-ish tier. I'm just curious, like which one ends up winning the World Championships, because I do think like a lot of them are really viable, and people are like not exploring them very much right now. Miraidon, Koraidon being top of my interest list, just because of course they're brand new Pokemon as well.
Can I give a hot take?
Okay, let's hear it.
I think Miraidon is incredibly overrated. Like that Pokemon does not do nearly as much damage as I think it's going to do if Electric Terrain is gone. And I also think that it just struggles in a meta where like Rillaboom is super rampant. You also have like a couple of teams that are using Indeedee for Shadow Rider Calyrex teams. I don't know. I think like as people were looking at it and saying, oh, this is going to be an S tier Pokemon. It's signature move, its signature ability, both super strong. But I don't know. I think it's overrated.
I think Miraidon struggles in one restricted format because when you have like 5 other Pokemon you pair it with, and Rillaboom's like one of the most common, then I think like you can't really abuse Electric Terrain as much, or it's like a lot harder, right? Because like a lot of players will have Rillaboom, and your other tools are also going to be a little bit limited because the best grass types are Amoonguss and the Rillaboom. And when you think about like running grassy terrain with your own Miraidon doesn't make too much sense. Running Amoonguss when you're setting up Electric Terrain, kind of difficult. Ogerpon pairs well, but I think it actually might be better in a 2 restricted format than a 1 restricted format, mainly because I think it could actually pair well with other restricteds like Calyrex Ice Rider. Like we have seen Miraidon do well in the VR tournament, which was a large online tournament with Blood Moon, Ursaluna, and Farigiraf. And I think with another strong Trick pairing, like I think it gets better. But yeah, 1 restricted, I think it's not bad, I'd say, but like it does require a lot to set up its Electric Terrain, so it can actually do a lot of damage. But once it does do a lot.
Yeah, like I've seen some Electro Drift calcs that Pokemon can hit really hard if you put all of that investment into it, or like you get a Calm Mind boost or something. But I think you're right, James. I think like that would be the caveat is in a single restricted format, I do think Miraidon is like C tier. Maybe B tier at best if somebody can figure it out.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I just like,
I'd probably give it the B ranking. I also think like it's so It's so interesting. I'm curious, like, how our opinions of the restricteds will shift as time goes on, because it's like right now, like, people have barely scratched the surface of what these Pokemon can do, and so it's like very easy to default towards like, oh, like, let's just throw a Choice Specs on it, or throw an Assault Vest on it, or maybe like some setup oriented set around it. And I'm always curious, like 2 or 3 months from the meta now, how different are the way people like people are using these Pokemon? Like it looks from where it is right now. Speaking of that Victory Road tournament, like Miraidon was actually number 6 in terms of usage, in terms of restricted. So it was up there. It's like Calyrex, Shadow Rider, and Ice Rider is 1 and 2. Terrapagos is 3. Kyogre is 4. Koraidon is 5. Miraidon is 6. Groudon at 7. Lunala 8. Zamazenta 9. And then Zacian is 10. I'm surprised people are actually using Zacian. Like, I haven't really tried it out, but I find that really interesting. Rayquaza, for example, that's something that I feel like I got my butt kicked by like multiple times, and like people are using it kind of as like a newer version of Dragonite, where you can throw it onto like Chien-Pao compositions as well. So I do think because there have been some really strong teams built around like the top tier restricteds already, a lot of people are kind of just like modifying and editing versions of those. But I'm curious, like, what else can come up, like Zamazenta being something that I was intrigued by, and did have a notable performance in this tournament. I think it finished in 8th place. James, to your point about these bulky matchups with Incineroar and Amoonguss earlier, well, this team also is very bulky. It has Incin, Amoonguss, Iron Defense, Zamazenta, Porygon 2, Urshifu, and Raging Bolt. So kind of a nightmare to fight against.
Can I just say, like, Zacian and Zamazenta did not need to be nerfed the way that they did. Like, I
tried dirty.
I tried Zacian, not the crown form. I had Clear Amulet because I was testing this team. I was making a video on it, and I was trying it, and I felt so like I literally forgot when you switch out that you lose your boost again, and I felt like the damage was just so sad sometimes. Like, it had to be paired next to POW or have Helping Hand, which the team did have a lot of, but it felt like so much commitment for one Pokemon. It just really did not feel good. Like, you also like think it's a regular Zacian too. It's not even the boosted Zacian, which is like what, 150 base attack. We used to be 170. Like, man, why did they nerf that Pokemon so much? Like, it's really like barely usable, I would say.
I thought like if maybe Zacian and Zamazenta got some sort of buff to their signature moves against like a terrestrialized Pokemon, I'm like, okay, maybe then there's a reason for the nerf, but there isn't one. So I don't know what they did to them and why that happened, but it has been kind of sad to try to get Zacian to work on its own. Zamazenta is really interesting though because of all the body press mechanics for it. So I thought like, yeah, looking at that, super interesting into the format. Incineroar food. It's kind of nice. But I do think that it struggles a lot when there's been some underexplored options for maybe some like ghost type Pokemon. Like I've seen like Skeledirge and Golden Go running around in the meta right now. So I don't know.
I think Golden Go is going to have a big comeback. I mean, I feel like it always does well at least one tournament in each regulation. And I think the immunity to Spore is a big deal. I think being able to like wall Calyrex, Ice Rider, Futera, for example, and just also resist Glacial Lance is a really big deal. It's not a surprise that this won the Victory Road tournament, right? It was a Nasty Plot set, I believe, with Metal Coat. And yeah, it's just a really good Pokemon, right? It's like we've seen Golden Go come and go throughout the formats, but I'm not surprised to see it make a return. It's kind of interesting to talk about the non-restricteds as well, like, who are the big winners, who are the big losers. And like, for example, Pokemon like Clefairy and Mienshao were not really being used previously, but people are using a lot. I think Farigiraf has always been good, but a lot of people are using it in particular. Like, there's so much priority that you can block. I mean, Rilla, Incin, Amoonguss, Urshifu, those continue to be as good as ever. Pelipper, like we mentioned a little bit earlier, but I think that's one Pokemon that is going to have a pretty big impact on the format as well. So those are just a couple that immediately come to my mind, but I'm curious what kind of non-restricteds you guys are looking at.
Well, on the anti-priority train, I think Zarina should get an honorable mention because there have been a couple of teams running around that are using like Kyogre, Zarina. I don't think that Zarina necessarily fits on many other teams. Like if you look at replacing Zarina versus Farigiraf, I think Farigiraf you're always going to have a bit more value. But Zarina is super interesting because it gets triple axle again since that TM was reintroduced into the game. So you actually have the ability to KO things like Rillaboom, and then you also just get the anti-priority with Queenly Majesty. So I feel like there is some benefit for Zarina being on very specific teams.
Yeah, I think one of the fun things about at least this format that at least is fun for me is being able to use like some Pokemon because of restricted and how they support it. Like different tools that we wouldn't see be used previously, but they actually do have a niche in this kind of format. For instance, I was messing around with an Altaria team of Kyogre just so you can beat the what was it called, the Koraidons and the Groudons. So I thought that was pretty fun. I think there's also like a lot of other Pokemon we've seen, like you mentioned Mian Chao. I think Comfey we've seen a bit more of for the Terrapagos. Also 75% healing in grassy terrain with floor healing. What was that design, man? But also, like, I think there's a lot of probably underexplored use Pokemon. I think some of the Paradox Pokemon, like the Iron Bundle that might have, like we previously have seen drop off, Screamtail, like now that they have their partners with abilities or that could set up the photosynthesis so you could actually not have to run boost energy, I think could be really unique here. I also think stuff like Regieleki and a few others. I think Regieleki is actually really good. I'm kind of surprised not many players have used it. I think it's really good in this format. I think the Electroweb speed control is like really obnoxious to deal with. I don't know. There's just so many different Pokemon I think that can be utilized in this format. Like Galarian Moltres, I think could pick up. You mentioned the Skeledirge, which you have the Unaware, I guess, Terra Normal for Calyrex, which could be like really helpful. I think there's a lot of niche Pokemon that could be picked here in this format that we haven't seen. Maybe like Zoroark too.
Yeah, I think Worlds is going to be really interesting this year, just because it's like restricted formats generally have lent to like kind of more unique picks rising to the top because they can counter other restricteds. But with this only being one restricted, I think team building is actually really interesting in this format, honestly. And even though like a lot of people are indexing very heavily on like the Calyrexes, Kyogre, and Terrapagos right now, I think it's like, yeah, there's so much other stuff that can work. Groudon is one that's interesting, but I don't know. It's just like Precipice Blade sucks as a move. And like when you have these Pokemon that do have reliable moves that can actually hit, it feels bad. But I mean, Groudon succeeded before. So I'm mainly curious if anyone like does interesting stuff around that. Like I remember seeing a team that was like Grimmsnarl with screens and, you know, a bulkier Groudon that can set up, which I think was a really smart way to build around it. At the time of recording this, it's right before Indianapolis Regionals. That's the first major tournament of this format in-person tournament. And so I think that's going to set the tempo a bunch. I generally expect most of the top teams there to feature like the restricteds we had already talked about. But I'd be really excited if we saw something that like no one's even thought about using or just like no one's really talking about right now.
Have you thought of Weakness Policy Bulldo Solgaleo?
Wait, is Solgaleo even in the game? Wait, some restricteds aren't in, right?
Solgaleo, you lay said Lunala and you don't mention Solgaleo, dude.
Well, I don't know. I was like, maybe they let one of them in and they don't let the other. I legitimately, I don't think I've seen a single Solgaleo yet, so.
I'm joking. I don't think that's a good strategy at all.
I will prove you wrong, Rose.
Oh my god, please do.
I don't think Solgaleo's bad, actually. Like, I've been thinking about it, and like I think Solgaleo and Necrozma Dustmane are actually probably like some of the more underrated restricteds as of right now. I think Full Metal Body, I think it's called, and then Necrozma Dustmane with Clear Amulet. Like I've seen it replace like the Kali Ice team on Pelipper, and that thing with Sword Stance can hit really hard. It's actually surprising. So I think those two are actually not too bad. But I do expect I'd expect maybe like 3 restricteds that aren't like maybe the top 5 actually in Indianapolis Top Cut. I feel like the first format of a regional with restricteds usually does lead to like a lot of variance where we've seen like some surprise thing come up. When you were talking, Rose, I thought you were going to bring up the Gloom team. That's really what I thought you were going to bring up.
Can we talk about that? Because I feel like it's legitimately become a viral meme in the VGC community in the last like week. I have no context to it other than I know a lot of people were getting their butts kicked by this team. So anyone know anything about it?
Yeah. James, I'm first curious though, have you run into this at all on any of your ladder excursions?
I think they're mainly playing best of 1 ladder, if I'm not mistaken. And while I have played a bit of best of 1 and gotten decently high, like I do not think I've played them.
The TLDR of this is there's a closed sheet best of 1 team that's running around that is Gloom and Dugong. So Gloom gets the ability Stench.
Yep,
Stench. And it has a loaded dice with Bullet Seed. So you have like about a 50% chance to actually flinch something. And then Dugong is basically kitted out with a bunch of Oko moves. So you have like, you have Horn Drill, but then you also have Fake Out, Perish Song, and Aqua Jet with Quick Claw. So like, they don't get to move and they just die. That's the strat.
What does the Lunala on the team do? What is that moveset?
That's a great question. That I don't know. I only know about the Gloom and the Dugong as like a duo. So
I think if I'm told correctly, it was Meteor Beam, Wide Guard, Moon Blast, Moongeist Beam.
Interesting. Okay.
And the Tinglu has Fissure as well.
Oh my god.
I can't remember the last time like a team like that is just purely from Shodan has like become like a national sensation, you know? Like it's actually crazy to think about.
Oh, okay. Actually, if anybody wants to go look at this, go look at Paul Chua's Twitter because he's the famous player that got cooked by this team by his own, volition. He got cooked by this, but it's Gloom, Armarouge, and DD with Dugong, Tinglu, and Lunala. And like it is quite interesting to see that is actually something that happened. And there's even a esports article that was made about this specific instance in Pokemon history. So
I think I have a funny quote. I was watching one of Joe Ugarte's streams, and he literally got asked this question: would he beat the Gloom stuff? And he said yes, but if he did lose to it, he said that Batman couldn't beat that answer out of him. So I'm surprised that Paul posted it on Twitter.
I respect it. You got to own up to it, man. Seriously. Now we've talked about the meme. I'm very curious to see if it actually picks up any traction, but whoever that team creator is, like, kudos to you because I've never seen so much discussion about a team out of nowhere like that. And yeah, if you make a rental, I will gladly try it out. But one thing I was thinking about is just like, how this format looks different and also like some of the items that people are using. I specifically mentioned that because I feel like Clear Amulet is maybe better than it's ever been. Covert Cloak continues to be really viable as well. I've seen a lot of Clear Amulets, like Calyrex Ice Rider plus Clear Amulet, just a beautiful combination. I've seen people use it on like Calm Mind Terapagos as well. And so curious if you guys have any thoughts about like items specifically and maybe how things have shifted a little bit from other formats.
Yeah, I think Clear Amulet, Calyrex was definitely a thing whenever they introduced that item. I was like, man, this is going to be pretty annoying to deal with when the restricted format comes. Covert Cloak, of course, just always going to be a great item, especially with like fake out users just running around. But yeah, I think what's awkward is berries. Like, it's kind of funny. We still see Citrus Berry like a decent amount, but of course, it's weird when the Calyxes are like one of the most core Pokemon that you have to deal with in this format. And like half of its ability is preventing you from eating the berry. So it's kind of interesting on taking that risk versus reward, where it's like, okay, you could have your berry in other matchups, or like if the Calyx is not on the field, you can consume your berry. But if not, like it becomes a bit problematic. So it's kind of interesting to see. Rocky Helmet also has been increased with Urshifu, water Urshifu, like just running around. And I'm kind of interested on like if it's worth it or not, like because they don't run Sash. But you do pressure like Surging Strikes. Like if they click it and you switch into Moongus, it can make them think twice about clicking it. So I think it's pretty interesting there. Can't really think of anything other than like some of the best of one stuff that I've seen with just random weakness policies with Terra. I have seen quite a few of them. Like Lugia, I have seen it quite a bit. I think Covert Cloak and Safety Goggles on like the Gouging Fire and the Screamtail, I think is really interesting as well. And then of course, Dragon Cheer, I think, was like a cool move that like got better, I think, in this format, just because we have Dragon types that are actually useful now, and this other than Raging Bolt previously was.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen anything too different from that. I think the only thing that I've noticed is Assault Vest Incineroar is like a little more real than normal.
Yeah.
Like, it was already something that was around in Reg F, but I think even more so now, especially after Mikael de Beste actually ended up having like an AV Incineroar on his Koraidon team, and people are actually looking at that as a big tech to put on their own teams.
Yeah, I think to both of your points, it's like Citrus less effective now because you have the Calyrex existing, and Assault Vest just improves your Calyrex Shadow Rider matchup so much more. It's just like you're really not taking very much damage from it. So I think, that's a really good call out. I've seen people who are starting to like drop Flare Blitz and just running like Will-O-Wisp and knockoff, which I think is also really interesting. So there's some flexibility there. I'm curious about manual taunt maybe picking back up as well, since like Farigiraf is really good, and you have like these slower paced teams that either have Farigiraf or Trick Room. I feel like people are sleeping on Ursaluna Blood Moon a little bit. Like, this Pokemon was so good in the last format, and it does ridiculous amounts of damage, and so that's like one of the offensive tools that I'm curious about and how it'll do as the format progresses. And Mienshao is also one I'm really curious about. I feel like people are talking about like pairing Mienshao with Calyrex Shadow Rider. Like, how do you beat like the combination of Mienshao, Calyrex, and Indeedee? I actually haven't run into that many recently. And one of the things that intrigues me is also just wide guard users in general. Like we were talking about wide guard Lunala earlier. I've seen a bunch of wide guard Araquanids, especially on these like slower Trick Room compositions with Calyrex Ice Rider as well. Wide guard, obviously, I think very strong right now because you have so many Pokemon that use spread moves. A lot of the restricteds like to use spread moves as well. And, Pelipper, we were talking about earlier, well, that also gets access to wide guard. So, yeah, I think I'm just kind of curious to see where things go because it feels like after the first week or two, it's like clear there's like 4 or 5 restricteds that people have deemed really powerful. We've already talked about all of those. But yeah, it's mainly my big question marks are like, what about are the underexplored ones that like no one's really trying out so far? And I wonder if indie regionals will bring any of those. So I'm curious. I want to pose a question to you guys. Like, if you had to pick one like sleeper pick that people aren't talking about right now, which one would you go for?
I don't know. That's actually really tough. I think before going into that, I think the only thing that I would be like really interested about seeing too is we saw this really unique interaction of how like the Dragonite Chien-Pao teams were really strong. And then everybody started to tech in Farigiraf or just anti-priority. And so they went down until the meta sort of rotated back to have them back in. And so I do wonder if like to your point, Aaron, if we do see some of these like more manual taunts come online or like maybe wide guard starts to go away because Shadow Rider and Ice Rider Calyrex drop off, like what does that actually open the door for to come through? And so like thinking about maybe some underrepresented Pokemon at the moment, I actually feel like there aren't enough people talking about Koraidon. Maybe I'm off on another planet or something and like Koraidon is actually like super top meta and it like I think it could win, but I do think that that's one that I feel like people are also still not giving like enough respect to.
I think Koraidon's actually, in my opinion, like a top 3. Like,
yeah.
I think so too.
I think after Calyx's, I would put Koraidon, and yeah, like I think Lake Calyx's are the top 2, like easily, no contest, and then the next 3 would be, I think it's kind of a leeway, but Kyogre, Koraidon and Terrapagos would probably be in that route, but I don't think there's too much of a difference between them realistically in terms of ranking, at least for me. We've already talked about some of the restricteds. I did mention I think Necrozma Solgaleo can be pretty good. The Dustmane one, especially because the Dawnwings one, I think is not bad, but I think the Trick Room ones have been really dominant. I feel bad if the Gloom guy was going to Indianapolis and this team got leaked to everyone, but well,
would it
really
work as well in like an open team sheet format though? Open team sheet best of 3 with Stench, Gloom. Like I feel like you kind of know what's coming.
You might know what's coming, but that doesn't prevent
you
the 50%
can stop it,
chance
yeah.
you can
I guess that's true. Can't stop the bullet seeds. Oh, that'd be so funny.
Yeah, we've also mentioned Ray. I think Ray is also, a really strong contender, at least for me. I think Ray is actually pretty strong right now if you have enough Cali Shadow Rider answers. I think one we haven't talked about, which I would probably say if I had to pick one that we haven't talked about yet that could do well, I think Ho-Oh is actually not too bad.
I was going to mention that one too, yeah.
Yeah, another abuser, Clear Amulet, pretty decent typing across the board, really high special defense, regenerators, really nice. Decent into Cali Shadow Rider, really good into like Insane, Rillaboom, Amoonguss, and even Urshifus, if they don't run Scarf, can get very heavily punished. So I think that Ho can definitely make a swing here.
I like that. I wonder too if like the only other one that I was considering is just like Kyurem Black and White. They have such interesting abilities. And I wonder if there's any sort of rise in Terrapagos that Kyurem Black and White might actually be able to like find a really good niche in the meta. So maybe that's something that I find a little underexplored at the moment.
Kyurem White's not bad. Kyurem Black, I brought that thing to a regional. It's so hard to use. Would not recommend.
I definitely agree with the picks that you guys had. James, the top 5 you said, I feel like definitely very clear. Like within that, there's obviously individual tierings as well, but in terms of just usage rates, everyone's using those right now. But it's like the next 5 to me that are really interesting, like the Rayquazas, the Lunalas, Zamazenta, Groudon, Zashi, and Miraidon. And so I'm just eager to see the results of indie regionals because I think they'll give us a better sense of where things are headed. And yeah, I would expect like 80+% of day 2 to consist of one of those top 5 that we were talking about. But then it's like, even if you have like 10 to 20% of the fields, it's one of the others. It's just interesting to me to explore like how people are building around these. But at the end of the day, it's just cool because I think there are a lot that are really viable and it's not like teams solely depend on these restricteds in order to succeed. But Yeah, I think we've covered a fair amount of ground here. You know, we have only just started playing the format. We obviously found out about the rules a while back, but ladder officially kicked off. Indie Regionals is coming up. So, yeah, any final words or feelings as we wrap up this kind of first takeaway of Regulation G?
Yeah, hopefully Indie Regional shakes it up so where I'm not playing Ice Rider, Shadow Rider, like
James is so bored, guys. Please, he's so sick. He is so sick of the horse. You guys need to give him a cure.
The cure is Kyogre. I think Kyogre is going to win Indie. That's
Ooh, okay. I like it. A
Spice
bold
take.
prediction there. I
Exactly.
personally want to see Rayquaza put in some work because I lose to it too much. But yeah, I think I think Terrapagos is probably the Pokemon I'm also really interested in, just because mechanically it plays kind of weird, where it's like, oh, like your strongest move actually becomes weaker when you go for Terra because it goes from single target to spread, but then the ability is really good, but you only get to do it one time, and you only get to remove weather or terrain one time, and so I think that's the Pokemon I'm most excited to see others play with, just to learn how people are using it. Also because like Terra Starstorm being super effective into Terra is really interesting, so if you're able to bait out those Terras early, that's valuable. So I think I just have my eye out on that Pokemon because it plays differently from anything else that we have, and I'm curious what impact it has early format.
I mean, we shall see. I don't have. It's funny. Terrapagos I think is cool. A Kyogre is like I want to use that mon. I've been.
It's your
using
mon, James. That's your
Yeah.
Pokemon. One of the most successful, maybe the most successful Kyogre player of all time in VGC.
It's funny because I'm literally right before we started recording this, I was literally making a script about what I thought about Kyogre in this format because everyone keeps asking me. I think it's really good though in a closed team sheet though, because closed team sheet, like you could get so many people off guard with a choice scarf or choice specs, like
Yeah.
nuke.
I agree. Actually, having just played with it on ladder, I'm like, this thing is insane in ladder online best of one, but I think it's a little bit more exposable in best of three, where if you commit a choice item in best of three, like, and your opponent knows you're Water Terra and knows you can't play defensively with it, I think it's a lot harder. So I agree with your assessment with it. I'd love to see a top player like manage to rise all the way to the top of regionals with it. So we'll see. But I generally agree that it's a lot easier to like pilot the Calorexes. But yeah, I think we've been rambling on for quite a while. So thank you to James and Rosemary for joining me. Thanks to Beast Coast, of course, for allowing us to do these videos. It's going to be a crazy couple of months. It's going to be very exciting. You know, we'll all be involved very much either as players or casters throughout the next couple of months. And so hopefully you all enjoyed. Let us know what you are hoping to see from us as well as Regulation G down in the comment section below. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you all next time.